Hey everybody, this is the ESOP guy, and we are on a journey to an ESOP and beyond. And I'm just so excited to do this episode today. We are launching into some things that I think are super helpful for companies. Specifically today, it is for companies that are mature ESOPs. And when we start thinking about some of the things that we've talked about over the seasons that we've been doing the podcast, a lot of it has been geared around, creating the actual ESOP transaction and going through all of the steps of, I would say, kind of just call it pre-ESOP type of things. For companies that have been through that and they've become mature ESOPs, we're talking about companies that have kind of walked through, they've done a lot of their retirement of the debt, and they're moving into some other things that I think are really important. And even at a very early stage company that's looking at doing an ESOP, these are things that need to be considered. And there are definitely questions around this that we get asked from time to time on companies that are just working through that. So that is what we're going to talk about today. Thank you for joining. If you're new to the podcast, thank you for joining today and listening. You can go and find all of our episodes on journeytoanesop.com and go through that. And please rank and review the podcast, or rate and review the podcast. It's always super helpful to get feedback from there. So with that, I wanted to introduce Renee. She is the CFO of Holiday Builders, and she has agreed to talk about some of these mature ESOP concepts that we're alluding to. Renee, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Phil. Although I haven't gotten a promotion yet, I'm just the controller.
I like to call you the CFO, but
I know.
maybe this will help the promotion. So
yeah. I don't know if my boss will like that, but maybe.
All right. So Renee, who's the controller and does a lot of CFO work.
Correct. How about that? That sounds good.
Absolutely. So Renee, as we start and invite you into the podcast, the tradition that we have is asking you like the icebreaker question, which is, hey, what's your favorite movie and why?
Okay. Well, my favorite movie of all time is probably The Sound of Music.
Sound of Music.
And yes, because all of the dancing and singing and, the one song, what do you do about Maria? So I always used to say, what do you do about Renee?
About Renee. Right. That's really cool. So I have the mountain in the background, so that makes me think of Sound of Music too.
Yes.
The hills are alive with the sound of music. So
that is correct.
That is really cool. Let me just say that is the first time anybody said The Sound of Music. So that's really cool. And I have done a Sound of Music podcast called SAR. What is it? SAR, not, what is it? What's the song that goes with The Sound of Music? Far, not, yeah, I keep messing up the song. A Note That Follows, so, no.
Oh, la, da, 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 da.
But anyway, I did kind of something on stock appreciation rights, and so I kind of screwed that one up. But anyway, so thank you for coming to the podcast. We really appreciate it. As we go into the topic here, we're going to start a little bit more kind of higher level of mature kind of ESOP issues that you've dealt with. But let's talk a little bit about the company, Holiday Builders. How long have you guys been in ESOP?
So we just celebrated our 25th anniversary. We became 100% employee owned in 1999. And I think everyone, we actually have some employees who have almost been here that long, which is crazy.
Yeah, that is crazy. So that's a lot to go through. And from 1999 to now, obviously like 25 years of, all the things that can happen, after the ESOP gets formed. So, and you've been there for how long?
20 years. I just celebrated 20 years with Holiday.
Awesome. So you've been through a lot of the ups and downs. So great.
Very much so.
And you guys are, as you go through your type of ESOP, you're an S Corp?
Yes, 100%.
Obviously that makes a difference in S versus C. So as you go through that means that you guys are tax exempt from income taxes.
Correct.
And so in terms of that by itself, and knowing that that's an aspect that most companies have to pay income tax or do distributions based on the taxes. Has that been an element that's been really, favorable for you guys in terms of managing the company and, having extra capital or whatever to do things that you need to do?
Extremely so. As my president once said, he goes, I have to think of the distributions to our employees like almost our tax bill. So you kind of look at it in that way. It really being tax exempt has really helped financially over the years.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's really important too, because when we model it out at the front end of a transaction, it's like this is 30% additional cash flow every year, and it just
Yep.
never goes away. So that's pretty cool. So as we talk about the things that you do for specifically for the company and really specifically to the ESOP, what sort of things that are you involved in terms of just, responsibility or things that kind of come back to you in terms of just purely managing retirement plan issues or just overall, like, requirements of your job?
Well, basically, it wasn't my job to begin with to handle the ESOP administration, but during the downturn, of course, everyone took on additional responsibilities, and the ESOP was one of them for me. I'm basically the main point of contact between our third-party administrator, our attorneys, our trustees, and so basically everything is funneled through me. At least that way, one person in the company knows everything that's going on.
Cool. Because that way you're the ESOP expert in the whole scheme.
I try to be.
Well, I like that though, because it helps, being one person, you're kind of the hub of everything that happens. So you are, what all the issues are. And then as you get to, obviously bring in the president and different people into those, you pretty much understand the issue, and it's like, you have the whole story kind of thing. So, so through all of the years that you've been there, some of the things, like, as you mentioned, the downturn first and foremost. One of the questions, and people really get concerned about this, is like, if I do an ESOP and then the company has a downturn, what are the ramifications of that? So clearly, in my mind, across any economy and any company can be susceptible to a downturn, whether you're an ESOP company or not an ESOP. It's just purely an economic reality.
Absolutely.
The downturn that we're going to talk about with you guys happened, I'm guessing, in 2008, 2009.
Yeah, it actually began in 2006. Really, you could see the writing on the wall at that point in time. We had over 400 plus employees, and by the end of 2007, we were down to 263. And then it even went further down to there during the very, very bottom. We were down to 50 employees. So quite a dramatic decrease in our headcount.
Wow. So that's got to be difficult to live through, right? And then kind of come out of. So specific to the ESOP, I know there's some issues of, obviously, that payroll is a big factor in the ESOP because it's a retirement plan, and we know that the payroll kind of dictates the amount of money that gets contributed to the plan. So when you set up an ESOP plan, there's this structured process limitation, and there's kind of a contribution threshold that you're used to making every year based on your inside note, that
Correct.
you have.
Yes.
So let's break that apart a little bit, maybe more from an educational standpoint first. And maybe I'll just kind of let you kind of explain, like, the parts and pieces of that. So you have your employee base, you have the actual limitation on what the contribution can be on an annual basis. And then you have this structured inside note that says, hey, on an annual basis, this is what your inside note payment's going to be. So talk about that a little bit, and then we'll kind of talk about the questions related to what the downturn did to you guys.
Sure. So basically, you need to be able to contribute to the plan enough money for the plan to be able to make its loan payment. And with that, you just hope that the terms that you've agreed upon in that note will sustain over time. During the downturn for us, unfortunately, we were bumping up against that threshold to where we would be paying 10% excise tax if we continued to make those loan payments at that dollar rate. Then you add on to that, you also want to contribute and pay out your employees. So there was a multitude of issues that go into the loan, the contribution level, and all of that. I'm not really sure if that answered your question, but that's the gist of it.
No, I think it did. It's kind of categorizing. And so as we talk about excise tax, I'm going to put that over here for a second and go back to, like, some of the basics. Like, as you talk about the inside note, the contribution that's being made on an annual basis is paying off an internal note between the company and the trust. And what that does is it releases shares to the employees, and there's a inside note amortization schedule that accompanies the deal as it gets structured at the very beginning. And then what you're doing is you're running that inside note out to, its finality or its termination when you've paid off all the note payments, essentially. And so what happens though is that's dictated, the amount of money you can contribute in an annual basis is dictated by the 25% limit of payroll.
Yes.
And that means, as we go back to the downturn, if my payroll you had 400 people, is that right? Roughly?
Yeah, 400 plus.
400 plus people goes down all the way down to 50, right? So my payroll, what it does, just goes super low. My 25% limit goes, down to that number where I'm actually less than what I can actually contribute to the plan, essentially from my inside note payment. And that would trigger, if that happens, that would trigger excise tax.
Yes, 10% excise tax.
In on top of that, in the middle of not having a very good year, right? So it's like, thank you, government, for putting that on us, right?
Right. And it was, the loan payments had been decided prior to all of this. So it wasn't for any good reason, let's put it that way.
Yeah. No, it wasn't for any good reason, but it's the reality of compliance. And that's part of what I think people think about. Like when ESOPs, we talk about ESOPs, we just have to deal with, there is compliance requirements that whether they make sense or don't make sense, they're there, and you have to know the rules. And then you have to figure out, like, how do you work through issues that can come like that within the rules, right? So let's talk about, like, you guys went through the downturn, then that happened. How did you avoid paying the excise tax?
Well, thank goodness for us, we had an outside trustee who was very knowledgeable in ESOP transactions and had a wealth of knowledge about different options that were available to us. That in conjunction with our regular ESOP attorney, we were able to not re-amortize, but we basically refinanced the note into a more affordable payment that we could afford.
You refinanced your inside note.
Correct.
Yeah. And this is where it gets confusing for people, because the inside note is separate from any of the outside note obligations that you have. On initial transaction, that could be the outside note to the shareholder or to the bank. So when you re-amortize the inside note, you're basically, is it more just an effort of documentation, redocumenting the inside note?
Redocumentation, because it's cash in, cash out. I mean, it doesn't really have any financial impact to your financials or your cash flow.
Yeah. So, and this is something that I can tell you, probably 80-something% of all the new ESOPs I do, there's usually confusion around the difference between the outside note and the inside note. And when we say it's a inside note payment, what we mean by that is that the cash moves from the company into the bank account, the trust bank account, the ESOP trust bank account, and then it moves back into the operating account. So it's basically going to be what we call round trip. And so it's not, when we talk about the payment, this is where it gets confusing, because people are thinking, oh, I have this additional payment to make, but it's not technically a cash flow payment. It's going to be, or an outside cash payment. It's going to be inside the company, and it's really there to just release shares. I mean, that's what it's intended to do, so that there's some order to that. Within that, typically the inside note is going to be structured around an amortization schedule that matches the benefit testing of the company's payroll, which basically is the 25% limit.
Yep.
And part of that is to match the amount of the benefit itself. So sometimes an ESOP contribution could be double-digit return or benefit to the employee, where a 401k match is like 4% or something like that. An ESOP could be like 12%. Depends on what everybody decides to do.
Easily.
But within that, you also have like this idea of, like, if the inside note's not long enough, then the company can create, massive amounts of repurchase obligation because people are accumulating shares too quickly.
Correct.
So, which is part of the issue too of re-amortizing the note. So in your case, you had way less payroll, so they re-amortized, and in that case, you would go what, shorter in your AM schedule?
We went longer.
You went longer. Okay. So yeah, because you had less of a limit. So you went longer. Do you remember what you guys were at and what you went to in terms of the AM?
I think originally we had like maybe 20 years left on it, or actually less than that. I think we went to 20 years. I think we only had 15 years left on it.
Yeah. So then you stretched it out to 30 years or something like that.
Yeah, we are stretching them out to 30 years now.
Yeah. Yeah. And so what's interesting about that is like when you do, I think a lot of our 100% ESOPs, we kind of start with 30 as our baseline, like, because I think that might work. But then there's variables, and the variables include the value of the inside note at the time of closing. And then the other variables is interest rate. And when, and typically you're going to use an AFR, which is an adjusted federal rate for the interest rate for the inside note.
Yes.
And I'm assuming that's what you guys stuck to, right? It was more of an AFR.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we continue to do so.
Yeah, I haven't had a lot of deals like this, but we've had issues with how long that inside note gets, because there are some variables that I've seen deals where we're like, hey, we're looking at something like a 55 or a 60-year inside note. I've heard of inside notes at 100 years.
Wow.
Crazy, but the
Yeah.
reality is with those variables, it's like it needs to work. And so, some of that's just trying to figure it out. I've had trustees be okay with actually doing something lower than AFR, which
Mm,
so AFR isn't technically mandatory. Everybody's just really comfortable with AFR because it's an IRS approved rate.
yes.
So in a way, at the end of the day, you guys kind of worked through that. I mean, it was more of a paper deal. It wasn't like, oh my gosh, it would have been silly for you to pay excise tax on something like that,
Exactly.
because it was just a matter of redocumenting it.
Hmm.
So as time goes on, then of course you come out of the downturn and you're hiring more people.
Yep.
So what were the implications of now you have more people coming back into the plan from lengthening the inside note? So you guys were at a shorter note, now you're at a longer note. What were the implications of moving back up, and how many people do you guys have today, employee wise?
We're about 230 employees, which I think is a good number. But yeah, you now have more people to manage, and you have a repurchase obligation, for that many more people. So
Yeah,
you have to learn to look forward and see what that benefit level is, and make sure that you can plan for it.
yeah, yeah. Which is a good segue into, we talk about repurchase obligation. Some people that are like, I don't even know what that is, right? So how would you define repurchase obligation for an ESOP company?
Basically, it's the money that you're going to have to pay yourself and your fellow employees at some point in time.
And where does the money come from?
It
I
has
know
to
this is
come from the company, operating funds.
yeah, has to come from the company, right? So mindfully, as a business manages itself, right, and thinks about financial responsibilities, just like anything else, right? There is like this repurchase obligation that is always kind of at the reality of being an ESOP company, and so part of that is thinking about how does repurchase obligation become a bigger issue for some companies, and when you start thinking about mature ESOP companies. So what are variables that make repurchase obligation a higher, like when you start looking at that growing, right? What are variables that increase your repurchase obligation that you guys are have gone through or thought through or think through in terms of how your plan?
Well, for us, it's mainly a tenured employee base. Like I said, we have multiple employees who have been here for over 20 years. And that means that they've had an ESOP contribution every year of those 20 years. So you know that you're going to have some very high balances, especially when we're an aging population. I hate to say it, but for a majority of home builders out there, we have an aging base. There's not a lot of young people coming in. And so eventually all of us are going to retire one day, me
Hopefully
included.
you included, right? Yeah. So retirement obviously is coming. I think that's a good point too, like the demographics of your population, of your employees. You don't have any control over that, right? I mean,
Nope.
if hopefully people want to work longer as well, but at the same time, there's a point where it's not going to work, right? So part of your repurchase obligation, obviously, is to look at the potential for when people are going to retire.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we track that like literally employee by employee, just so that we know in the future, when they could potentially retire, that, we are planning accordingly for that, both from an operational standpoint and an ESOP financial point of view as well.
Yeah, because they still got to do the work, right? So
Right.
yeah, the stress of I think every company has some of this at least, at some level, but the stress of trying to find, people, and I would be careful, like, because younger people would be like, you're kind of negative, but people that can do the same amount of work, or the idea of like the operational side of like grooming people. And the reality is that every generation works differently. I mean, we all know that, you know,
Yes,
baby boomers, Gen X, you know, the Gen Z, everybody has something to offer, but at the same time, we don't all work the same or have the same type of thought process. So
correct.
from a
Yes,
pure
agreed.
operational standpoint, how do you guys, I mean, I really think it's pretty, you know, cool that you're looking at that issue just operationally. So how do you guys look at that now? Are you just building training programs? Are you recruiting differently? Or what sort of things are you doing to try to bring in a younger group of people to start to blend the demographic?
Well, one thing that we have tried to do is get in touch with the local colleges. We currently have a scholarship that we contribute to University of Florida to their construction program. We've also worked with Florida Institute of Technology here local in Melbourne, just to try and get out there, get in front of people and say, hey, listen, you know, home building could be the right field for you, you know, and also recruiting from our trades too as well. And it's mainly word of mouth. You know, you have a lot of people who have kids now who are younger and they kind of have lost their way, you know, and they don't have college isn't necessarily the right thing for them. Well, you know, a trade-based school could be it.
Yeah, no, I mean, definitely, because I think the change in the economy with some of the things is that the people that have skills are getting paid more than people without skills. Like if you can go to college for a liberal arts degree and be like, all right, well, I'm going to do whatever. But with skills, it's like you do have an opportunity. So do you see a lot of differences in bringing somebody out of college, you know, through what you guys have been doing from a training standpoint, or is it just getting like, I just got to get them started so they understand what to do?
Just got to get them out there in the field, you know, get the hands-on knowledge. I mean, even for me, you know, in public accounting, I mean, it wasn't so much the knowledge of the books and you could read and do it, but until you're actually physically doing the work, it really doesn't help you very much. I would have to say hands-on is by far the
The way.
best way to go.
Yeah, no. So that's the operational side of it. Obviously, that's something you have to think about. And in your repurchase obligation, let's talk about the actual study you get, because it's like, what do you actually get? What's the document look like? Some of the things, it sounds like you're doing a little bit more than that. Obviously, you're looking deeper into each one of those, you know, maybe employees that you're talking about. So if a mature ESOP company gets a study, what sort of information is on there? And of course, who provides that study, which, you know, I think is a question people always ask.
Well, we've actually explored a number of different options. We explored different software solutions to where myself, could actually do it myself, go online and change scenarios. But I do highly recommend, at least for the first couple of times, going through your third-party administrator. First of all, they already have all of your information. They have all of your data. They have your census. They know what your population basically consists of. And then you run through with that specialist, like ask them questions like, what would happen if we did X, Y, and Z? Or how would if we did a loan here, what would this look like? If we did a contribution this year, what would that look like? And
Mhm,
they're actually very knowledgeable and they'll help guide you through that process. And what
mhm,
you get at the end of the day is a nice little report that says, you know, this is where we think your financial obligation is going to be in 5 years, in 10 years. And really, you want to compare those different scenarios so that way you can see. I mean, that's the one that's going to speak to you the most. If we
mhm,
do X, I'm going to be at here. If I do Y, I'm going to be here. Which one of those works best for the company, you know, from a financial standpoint?
mhm. So does it make you, I mean, you're the financial person for the company, right? Does it make you like try to like say, we're going to put a bunch of money away just to have it ready to go? Or is it like, I need some percentage of reserves to make sure that we're ready for that? So just from a pure practical financial management standpoint, what do you do differently once you look at that from a budgeting standpoint?
Well, you definitely do need to put reserves aside. You know, we've tried as you know, during a downturn, obviously that's very difficult, but during good times like now, you know, you would like to put those extra funds aside just to make sure that you've got yourself covered should another downturn occur.
Mm, yeah. I mean, and is that obviously hard for sometimes when you want capital to do other things with, or is it like, hey, we just get it, we're just going to do this, and are you fighting battles on that, I guess is the question.
No, not really, because we realize that, reinvesting in our company is obviously the number one thing that's going to make our ESOP grow and give our company, our employees the best benefit. But at the same time, since we have been through a downturn, you can see what the ramifications are. And so you know that you need to also plan for those things as well.
Yeah, that's, I mean, that's just kind of healthy. I think the concept can scare people into saying, I don't even want to do an ESOP because I mean, I'm gonna have, the company's gonna have this big, repurchase obligation. We don't even know how we're going to get through that. And so I think part of the questioning is just like to try to dispense with fear related to things that are just the reality of the way the business is structured, and have you felt ever like, oh my gosh, we got this plus this plus this is more of a burden, or is it just, this is manageable because we're proactively looking at it?
I think if you have the right people around you, you just are proactively looking at it. I mean, like you said, we're an S corp 100%, so we're not paying taxes each year. So I mean, you kind of have to almost equate it to that as far as either way you would be paying the money out. But do you want to pay it to the IRS or would you like to pay it to yourself and your fellow employees?
I like that question. The answer is no. I want to pay the IRS. Who would want to pay to the IRS? Of course, and this is what's beautiful about ESOPs, because when you do pay it to employees, what is really happening is you're transitioning the value of the business
Yes.
into their hands. And that was the intent. And then this is more of like, as I think about that too, that idea with the employees getting that, like, I get the value of the business, right? And I guess from your experience, how has that gone with them understanding that that's actually a major benefit comparatively to the company paying taxes? They have just a 401k. What have you seen? I mean, and I think probably so for some companies, it's hard for everybody to get it, but what's been your experience with the employees regarding the benefit of this for them?
It's very hard for them at first. I mean, you wait so long to get a statement. It's not like a 401k where you get a statement every month and you know what you're putting in, you know what your employer's putting in. But then you also have to invest in that as well. So it has been a challenge and it is hard, but I can tell you, once people see that statement and they realize the value that's coming to them, they're so excited about it. I mean, they really do. I mean, you have employees who thought they would never be able to retire, and now you have employees who are like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be able to retire and I'm going to be able to travel and I'm going to be able to do all the things I've been wanting to do. And if
Mhm.
you look at that compared to a typical company who only, contributes maybe 3% to 5% of your salary, I mean, do you really see yourself being able to retire off of that? I mean, you hope so,
You
but
hope you
it's
hope
it's
your house is
hard.
paid for. You hope your kids are fine.
Yeah.
Without the ESOP, you hope like, oh, because I think some people are like, well, I can retire, but I got to really downsize the way I live my life.
Yeah.
With ESOP, it's different. Or the opportunities there, right? And if the company doesn't do well, then of course it's not gonna bode well. But if it does well, they get to share in that.
Yes,
Um,
exactly. That's why we offer 401ks too, because we don't want, the term is always going, don't put all your eggs in one basket, right? So we
mhm.
also do encourage our employees to contribute to 401k because then at least you are diversified.
Yeah. And within the ESOP, there is the diversification rule that I guess it says something like if I'm over 55 and if I've been in the plan for 10 years, then I can pull some of that out, right? And that's going to create some repurchase liability and reinvest it in other areas. How often do you see people doing that realistically in your experience?
I think it just depends upon whether your company's doing well. You have people who are willing to take their money immediately. You have some people who are like, I'd rather wait. I think it's just all on an individual basis and what they're comfortable with,
Hmm.
which ultimately is what you need to be. And that's why we also partner with a financial advisor who we say, listen, I can tell you what I would do, but
That's
that's
good.
not maybe the right thing for you. So you need to go speak with someone who's savvy in that industry and can help you plan your retirement and whether you should take that money or not. It's up to them.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point because ultimately you do have a fiduciary responsibility, like because we have a retirement plan, right? So the fiduciary responsibility is like, hey, each individual employee, if you do have a financial advisor, they're getting, because they're making that decision on their own, right? Risk and reward. Um, and you don't have to be the one that kind of feels like you're responsible to guide them, right? I mean, at the same time, it's in your stock. So there's this connectivity thing that can kind of feel like you're overly responsible for someone's future, as opposed to being like, that's your choice, whatever you want to do, it's your future. So that's really interesting. So when you think about all of those things, you guys are kind of set to do what you need to do for repurchase liability. But as we get closer and closer to the end, let's just talk about like the end of the inside note. The shares are dwindling down. What are some issues that you have in terms of working through that issue? I guess the issue is like, at some point you're going to run out of shares in your trust.
Yep.
And so like, I know we're going to get into this releveraging idea, but when you get down to it, before we get into that, I was curious on motivating younger people versus the older people. And then the older people too have been in the plan a lot longer, right? So it's been compounding, and they see their participant statements are looking way different than the brand new person who's just starting, right?
Right.
How have you guys, what have you seen first off on the younger people's perception of the benefit of being in an ESOP? Secondly, just how do you educate people on the differences to help them understand that if you do stay here 20 years, I mean, it can be a significant part of your retirement.
Yeah, it's kind of twofold. Every young person's a little bit different. So I think it's just providing them with the educational materials as much as you can, and also having them speak to some of those tenured employees. Because when our stock value and they get their statements, people talk and just say, go talk to so-and-so. They've been here for 20 years. I mean, obviously don't ask them how much money they have, but,
No.
at least let them tell you, like, I'm going to be able to retire. And it's because I've been at Holiday for this long. I mean,
Yeah.
I think once they hear the stories like that from other employees and participants, then it's more real, if that makes sense.
Yeah. It's an interesting thing too, because I was at the NCEO Tampa conference in April, and we were talking about this topic in the session that me and this other gentleman were doing. And one of the things that we were talking about is showing graphically, you can't really show people what everybody has. That would be, not their business, but graphically, like compounded, like all the years, if you took all of those employees together and said the value of the plan, if I started in 20 years and I look at the graph bar chart and be like, all right, this is what it's been doing, right?
Yeah.
That's hard for some people to want to put down on paper for people, but at the same time, that's historically a record. So
Right.
that was one idea that came up. The other one was just this, as people talked about that after the session, it was the idea that, as people left the company, they're like, hey, I got $1.4 million in my, I mean, they're actually saying that to people. And I'm like, well, I honestly don't have, I mean, it's not my actual discipline anyway, but I don't have any good advice except that's got to happen, right? Some people are walking
Yeah.
about like, I just got $1 million or whatever. Which can be unbelievably motivating, but I don't think people understand. Like one thing I try to help people with the employees, like, they don't understand that first off, that the wealth creation in this country is from small businesses. Like people that have a lot of wealth, you can say they went to Harvard and went to a big company and but most of it is, somebody started a company, that company grew in business, the value of that business became part of their major part of their wealth. And that's what I feel like ESOP companies need to communicate to their people. Like it doesn't, and that guy that started the company was 30 years ago, and that they built value over 30 years. It's the same thing with an ESOP plan. It takes a long time because the value of the business is going to grow, assuming everything kind of stays consistent. But it's just one of those things that I do see a lot. I think part of the ESOP community or world is like, young people don't get it, so let's not do it. And, I just think they're not giving young people enough credit to see the bigger picture of things.
Yeah, I mean, it is a challenge. I mean, because you can put whatever you want to on posters and pamphlets and everything like that. But I think until you hear stories like that, it really doesn't pique their interest until then, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But, we have some savvy young people who work for us as well. And they're like, this ESOP thing, this is going to be a good thing, right? I'm going to, do very well. And I'm like, yes, you probably will.
You guys say probably, I guarantee you, yeah. I mean, if the company does well, you'll do well,
Yes.
And,
That's the right answer, Phil. Right answer.
and if you do well in the company, because I don't know if your allocation is based on payroll, but
Yep.
if you do well in the company, you'll get more shares. So, so cool. I think so thinking about like a stress issue of running out of shares, like first off, is that stressful for you and the company, and starting to think about how do we motivate people in the future if our plan doesn't have any more shares in the trust?
Yeah, well, we fortunately, back when the downturn happened, we were kind of forced to change the way that we did our distributions. So getting into the leveraging topic, we've actually been re-leveraging for a number of years. So that has helped us to plan towards the future of spreading those shares out over time. Because we did know that our original note was going to be paid off, and you do have to think about a benefit level for your employees. So that was one way we were inadvertently forced into, but it actually really did end up helping in the end.
Because you could, at that point, I'm just thinking out loud, maybe I'm wrong, you had a lower valuation.
Yep.
And when you so let's talk about like when you actually re-leverage, what are you actually doing, in terms of the number of shares of stock and how that actually works practically?
Practically, so from a technical standpoint, the company is buying the shares of stock directly from the participants who are eligible for distribution. Then, they go into treasury, and the company will then resell those to the ESOP at an agreed upon price.
Mhm.
We were choosing fair market value at the same date as our valuation was done, 12/31. You can go ahead and sell it at a lower value. You need an opinion letter from your valuators as well. But it does help that you are able to get that fair market value, that we kind of avoid double paying for something.
Mhm. And when you did this through the downturn, your value was lower. So was it easier to do the releveraging at that point?
I wouldn't say easier. It was more of a practical standpoint. Since it's strictly a balance sheet transaction, it didn't count towards that contribution level that we were talking about with the excise tax. So,
Mhm.
I mean, that was the main benefit for doing that at the
Okay.
time.
Yeah. So the main goal was to get more shares in the trust to be able to continue to release more shares down the road.
Over time and maintain a benefit level, trying to manage that as well. You don't
Right.
want to have, I mean, when our stock price was going through the roof, you are providing a very high benefit level for your employees,
Mhm.
and you don't want to do too high of a benefit. And you don't want to do too low of a benefit. You want to try and maintain that at some sort of level.
Yeah.
So by having the shares of stock be spread out, so to speak, over a number of years. If you find out that your benefit level is low, then all you have to do is make a contribution to the ESOP in the form of cash. And that will help keep you at it. It allows you more flexibility.
Mhm. Well, and doing it like a releveraging program where you're doing it almost every year, which is kind of what you're saying you're doing, right?
We were doing it for a number of years. It just happened to be the right choice for us.
Mhm.
Like I said, through that the repurchase obligation study, you go through those scenarios with them and you say, okay, if we did releverage this year and then we do a contribution next year and then we go back to releveraging, what does all of that look like? And for us at the point in time, it just releveraging made sense.
Because you're managing all those issues at the same time, repurchase obligation with the stock that you want to continue to release, with the benefit you're trying to target as well. Um,
Correct.
as far as your valuation goes, you had some obviously you had big stock price increases some years, and other years you didn't have that. I mean, and I'm kind of saying this in a sense of a comment and also a question. Um, the valuation increases that you saw were really kind of built around the idea that the company's EBITDA was higher, right? And the company's maybe balance sheet was better than it was in years past, right? So equity
Yes.
value with cash accumulation. Is there something that you can do to smooth out the spikes? Like if you guys see a lot of that coming in, but then you have a down, a year that's down. Are you seeing more volatility to that, or is it more smooth? And then if it is there something you can do to kind of help control the valuation itself?
Well, I mean, the market is what the market is, and your valuators take that into consideration. So there's really nothing we can control other than trying to make the business do well and be profitable. But again, when your stock price is doubling and tripling, it's a matter of trying to manage that benefit level and making sure that you're not over I don't want to say over benefiting, but it's kind of what it is. You don't want to provide too much of an over benefit and then, really compound your obligation, later on.
Yeah. Right. I mean, and I think that's part of what gets complex, in mature ESOPs, because you have all of these different pieces that are happening together. And I think what you guys have done really well is like you're getting good advisors and help you to determine like what's the best strategy, and even what you shared about, the scenario playing out the scenarios with a repurchase obligation. Like, what if we did this? How would that impact? So you can make really good decisions. And I think the other part of it is not waiting for something bad to happen and be reactive,
Correct.
Now you have like, oh no, we have to kind of manage, a major problem as opposed to being kind of on top of it every year.
If there's anything the ESOP has told me is to be on your toes.
On your toes.
Nothing
Exactly.
stays the same.
Yeah. But I mean, in that part, like I said, I think it scares people what we're talking about. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to do this episode, is to kind of lay out these things that are very doable, in terms of, as we kind of start to kind of close out the podcast, more focusing in on like advice that you might have for companies. Either, I always kind of break it down into stages, but either companies are going into like a brand new ESOP, or they're a partial ESOP and they're going to go to 100%, or they've just kind of been mature and all that. So things that practically would be good points for them to be thinking about. And I think we kind of addressed one just roughly, which is be on your toes or whatever. So what sort of things would you say that people really that are looking at that should be attentive to or thinking about, especially in your position finance wise?
Well, for an ESOP, I have to say it is an absolutely great benefit. I mean, it is well worth the extra, steps and hoops that you have to go through. But, to see the smiles on your employees' faces when they do retire is just priceless. Mm-hmm. And all of these things are manageable. If you get the right people with the right, knowledge base behind you, they'll help you navigate anything. I mean, there really is, hopefully no wrong step that you could do if you have everybody in the group with you, listening to the problems that you're having, looking at your repurchase obligation study, looking at your distributions, looking at your loan payments. I mean, you kind of need a good group of people around that to help you understand all the nuances and different things that could happen or, become of it. So I would just highly recommend an ESOP to anybody out there. I know that maybe the technical speak that we're speaking today is kind of scary, but it is completely manageable. You have to be on your toes.
Mm-hmm. Got to stay on top of it, have a good team, and really dig through issues. And I think even going through the experience you guys had at the downturn and then coming back up, I think that's priceless, because sometimes people just don't know what they're going to do when they're going to get there. So it's really a matter of being prepared for that, and knowing some of these things definitely will change. Everything is going to change. So just being prepared is really helpful. So
yeah, very helpful. I mean, the other thing that I would recommend is like you going to the NCEO conferences, go to those classes, yes, but talk to people, ask them what their experiences have been, because those are probably the best advice and best things that you can do is by getting that just handout and saying, well, this is what my company did, and this is what our company did. Those forums for you to speak. It is very, very helpful.
I'd agree, because of my NCEO cup, it's just timing is perfect. They gave these out at Tampa, so I got one.
Oh, nice.
I'm one of the benefactors of that. But everything we talked about is great. I think I just can't thank you enough for being, helping everybody think about these topics, because you've been there, done that. And I think that's part of what we're talking about with the NCEO. It's like, that's what people can experience, is talking to experienced people that have worked. I think that's the biggest benefit, I think, is like, you're going to talk to people that are really knowledgeable about these things. And that's really the intent today. So like I said, thank you very much, Renee.
No, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
I just thought of what my podcast was SAR, a note that follows so. So anyway, I was like, what was that? So it took me the whole time to think about it. And I'm like, yeah. So anyway, thank you so much. And, appreciate your time today.
Nope. Thank you very much, Phil.
Cool. So for everybody else, thanks for joining the podcast today. We will see you on our next step on this journey to an ESOP.